One of the biggest hurdles players will face when getting into Dark and Darker is learning to deal with PvE enemies. Even one mistake against monsters will cost a hefty chunk of health, and replenishing that health requires precious resources. Resources that you can't afford to waste if you want to be prepared for encounters with enemy players. So here, we'll be going over a few important general tips when it comes to PvE, followed by a more specific explanation for each type of enemy currently implemented in Dark and Darker. Even if newer enemies are added in the future, the fundamentals presented here should apply to future editions, giving you the understanding you need to experiment with and develop your own strategies. And to clarify, this guide is meant to explain how to deal with these enemies as a melee build with no blocking options. There's already some very good guides on how to use shields elsewhere, so this is specifically for evasive close-range tactics. No range tutorial here, because that can be summed up in a single statement. This isn't to say you shouldn't use those strategies when they're available. Some higher difficulty enemies are downright brutal to deal with without a shield or a planned cheese strategy, so if you have those options available to you, use them. First and foremost, understand the AI. The AI for enemies is extremely basic. They will take the most direct route towards the player they were targeting, and once they're in range to attack, they will attempt to. They can swap targets if a player tries to damage them while they are targeting someone else, and will instantly attempt an attack once their target switches. So if you're in a group setting, be wary of the surprise 180. With the knowledge that enemies will always attempt to attack when they're in range of you, even if walls are in the way in the case of ranged enemies, we can exploit their patterns very easily. Another important thing to keep in mind is that your movement speed is drastically cut when you are backpedaling, but not when moving sideways or forwards. If you need to quickly avoid an enemy's attack, it is always better to turn and move sideways or forwards than it is to try and hold backwards. Similarly, be mindful of your limbs. Swinging weapons will often extend your arms, and your arms are vulnerable. While limbs do take reduced damage, you will still be affected by negative status effects like slowdowns and poison if they get hit, so be mindful of your attack animations and don't get too greedy. Now for the more specific enemy tips. The Skeleton Footman is the most common and simple enemy, and the best for teaching our most important anti-PvE tactic. They have two attacks, an overhead swing and a sideways swipe that moves them forward. The best way to deal with them is a very basic walk into their range to bait, walk out of range, and punish the swing strategy. Intuitively, you may want to strafe the overhead swing, but this will not work, as this attack has extremely good tracking and a deceptively wide hitbox. There are two variants of this enemy, one with a shield, who will always counter with an attack if the shield is hit, and one without a shield. These two are functionally more or less the same, until they reach the Nightmare tier. The shielded one will reflect damage back to you if you hit its shield, even if your attack is a ranged attack, like a bow or a magic missile, while the unshielded one gains the ability to follow up the sideways swipe with the overhead swing in order to punish you. Simply bait out the second attack by staying barely in its range, and punish as usual. The Skeleton Swordsman is one of the three uncommon skeleton variants, and this one is packing as Y-hander. Basic bait and punish tactics work on this enemy, although worth noting is that even the common variants have access to a 2-hit combo. If they swing to your right, or counterclockwise, they can follow it up with a swing to your left, or clockwise, so only go for a punish when they've done a clockwise swing. You can also crouch and look straight down to go underneath their swings, so long as you are on level ground with them. Looking down is better than looking up, because when you look up, your arms tend to stick out. The Nightmare version adds a third hit to their cycle. Instead of ending with the clockwise swing, a final low sweep is added that must be jumped. Duck under the high swings, jump over the low. Another uncommon skeleton, and probably the most infamous one, is the Skeleton Axeman. The Axeman destroys everything you know about basic walk-in, walk-out punishing. It's possible to outrun their stepping swing, but it's very difficult and very frustrating, and even sideways movement is a challenge due to its great tracking. They also have a sideways swipe, which can punish strafing. The trick to beating this enemy consistently is to hold forward and left, while rotating your camera towards the Axeman, effectively rotating around the left side while staying as close as possible. You never need to leave point-blank range against this enemy, just rotate left anytime they're about to attack. You can also duck underneath their side swipe by crouching and looking straight down, in case you're caught on the wrong side of the skeleton. Nightmare Axe skeletons also gain a 2-hit combo, meaning you will often be required to duck and strafe. They also swing significantly faster. If you're caught in a tight space with nowhere to dodge, this can be especially troublesome, and it's a situation where having a shield or a cheat spot is almost mandatory. The Skeleton Spearman is probably the most complex of the basic melee enemies. They have 3 attacks, and all of them have different counterplay, but thankfully there seems to be a consistent strategy to deal with all 3 of them. If you're in range and moving backwards, they seem to have an extremely strong preference for the long-range stab attack, which will punish backpedaling in a straight line, but can be avoided by simply holding left or right while backpedaling. If you're up close and not retreating, they will attempt an overhead swipe, which cannot be strafed up close due to its tracking and hitbox, and must be avoided by moving away. Thankfully, this overhead swing has pitiful range, meaning you can easily avoid it even with slower movement speed. And sometimes they will attempt a forward-stepping side swipe similar to the other 2 uncommon skeletons, and just like those 2, it can be ducked. This attack has surprising range, so ducking underneath it is often necessary, especially with the high difficulty versions of this enemy. The easiest strategy here is to just move diagonally away from them, and then react to the sideways swipe with a duck. The diagonal movement dodges both the close range attack and the stab, but often gets caught by the side swipe, requiring ducking for 100% safety. Similar to the other skeletons, they gain a 2-hit combo option at Nightmare difficulty, following up their stab with the side swipe. The Mummy is a very basic melee type enemy. They function almost identically to the Skeleton Footman, only their range is much shorter. The exception is that sometimes they will do a forward lunge with great range. Dodging this is very simple, simply strafe to the side when you see it. It has no tracking to it, so this is extremely easy. Nightmare difficulty mummies gain the ability to paralyze you on hit and attack much faster, with a high preference for the lunge. The Zombie is another basic melee type enemy. This is very similar to the Mummy, but without the lunge. Instead, for their first attempted attack, they will spit out a lingering gas cloud that does damage over time. The summon animation is very long, but the cloud can become extremely inconvenient, especially if too many are formed. When their cloud attack is on cooldown, they will use a simple close range swipe that is very easy to avoid by backpedaling. The Mimic is also extremely simple. You can basically treat it like a mummy. Spider mummies are very small enemies that spawn out of a pot. Each pot can summon up to 3 at a time, and the spiders will continuously respawn until the pot is destroyed. Depending on the situation, it may be easier to go for the pot before killing the spiders, or to simply let them live until other enemies are dealt with, as their attacks are very short range and easy to avoid. The biggest danger with these enemies is getting swarmed and cornered, or paralyzed by the Nightmare difficulty ones. Generally speaking, if you jump onto the pot, you're safe. Just be ready to escape once you break the pot. The Goblin Warrior is basically a miniature skeleton footman. They move faster, have less range, and tend to travel in packs. The only real strategy is to stay out of their range and punish their swings, same as the footman. Sometimes, after taking damage, they will flee and gesture at you. It can be tempting to follow them, but oftentimes they will immediately turn around and whack you, so maybe don't follow them, unless you know your next attack will kill them. The Goblin Axeman is almost identical to the Warrior, with the exception being access to a 2-hit combo. This combo only happens after their forward stepping attack, and it's usually slow and short range enough to not be a problem. Individually, dire wolves aren't very dangerous. You can easily sidestep their attacks by strafing diagonally forward, but more often than not, these wolves hunt in packs, so do your best to not get cornered or surrounded, and use your environment to your advantage. The Demon Dog is basically just a bigger dire wolf. The strategy is very similar, strafe and rotate forward around them when they lunge. The Nightmare version gains an electrified collar that reflects damage, so be wary when trying to hit their heads. The giant spider is extremely rare. At the time of writing, this only appears in one room in the ruins and in a few spots in the high roller goblin caves. It has a basic melee attack that can be dodged by moving away, or circle strafing, or jumping, but also has a ranged poison spit attack that prevents you from attacking at all during its poison effect. There doesn't seem to be any possible way to dodge this attack up close. Even jumping over the spider's head doesn't do the trick. For this reason, you may want to keep your distance and utilize techniques that we'll be going over shortly in the ranged enemies section. The Skeleton Archer is a very common enemy, and one that is very troublesome. Dealing with ranged enemies in this game often boils down to side strafing at a medium range, waiting for their attack, and running in to punish. You may also want to use your environment to your advantage, as archers are not smart enough to know when you're behind a wall. If your damage is too low, you may need to repeat this process a few times, but if you have enough damage to kill them in one cycle, your life will be much easier. One of the bigger issues is when there are archers combined with other enemies. You need to keep moving constantly. The best idea is to lead the melee enemies away from the archer, or behind a corner, deal with the melee enemies first, and then kill the archer last. Or, you could be a bit riskier and try to fight the archer first while ignoring the melee enemies, which can be a viable strategy if the melee enemies aren't particularly difficult or fast. The trickiest issue with skeleton archers is their double shot. It seems totally random whether or not they'll go for one, and it will punish you if you try to run in after the first shot whiffs. Their second shot also aims for your center of mass rather than your head, meaning that ranges where you could side strafe the first shot become dangerous for the second, due to your body being wider than your head. This also means that, unlike the first shot, you can't duck the second shot. Your best bet is usually to deliberately wait out for the second shot, and not even bother punishing single shots unless you're confident that you won't get hit. And of course, Nightmare archers have a triple shot. The Skeleton Crossbowman is much slower than the Skeleton Archer, but more damaging and with a much faster projectile, meaning the ranges at which you're safe will differ. Because of their incredibly long reload time and lack of a double shot mechanic, these are generally easier to kill than archers, despite being less common. The same general strategy applies to Goblin Archers as the Skeleton Archers. Although there's no double shot, the window to safely punish Goblin Archers is much shorter, and they have significantly more health. Using walls and corners to your advantage is a very good idea here, as any arrows that hit you will poison you for a significant chunk of your HP. The Goblin Bolaslinger has less health than the Archer, and has no poison, but getting hit will reduce your movement speed by an incredible amount. Same strategy as always, strafe to dodge, move in to punish, move out to dodge, or use a corner for maximum safety. The The Skeleton Mage will cast a fireball at you, with very good accuracy. The fireball deals explosive AoE damage, and leaves a very dangerous damage over time effect on the floor. Treat them like an especially dangerous archer. When they or another enemy nearby is damaged, they will cast a protection spell, which seems to block 100% of damage. The safest way to deal with them is to lure them close to a corner and force them to damage themselves with their own fireball. Sometimes this option is unavailable, so you'll have to resort to strafe dodging and punishing. The Goblin Shaman is similar to the Skeleton Mage, having both an offensive projectile and a supportive buff. The projectile has some homing properties, which aren't usually an issue as the projectile itself tends to move downwards into the ground. Getting hit will slow you down tremendously and prevent you from healing for several seconds. Their support spell heals and provides enemies around them a buff to their attack speed, but the casting time is so incredibly slow that it's basically a free kill. Wisps fire a slow magic projectile at your body. The projectile is so slow that you can simply strafe around them at point blank and still be safe. When the wisp dies, it'll explode in a flash of light, blinding the player, but not dealing damage. The Death Skull is the first flying enemy and the best for demonstrating flying enemy AI. Flying enemies will always try to fly directly towards the player and won't pathfind around map geometry, which can be exploited. In the Skull's case, they do a lunge in a straight line. If your movement speed is high enough, you can simply run away in a straight line. Strafing to dodge is also an option, although you need some distance. Of course, you can avoid having to dodge entirely by hitting them before they can attack. If your damage is high enough, you can easily one-shot them. Otherwise, you can get them stuck on geometry so that their lunge doesn't go anywhere. The Nightmare version is a bit more troublesome, having much more health and dashing twice. Using corners and map geometry does wonders against these ones. Instead of a dash attack, the Giant Dragonfly fires a fan of poison. It's incredibly hard to predict which side the splash will start from, so circle strafing isn't usually an option. The projectiles have limited range, meaning you can bait out one spray, punish it, and usually be able to squash the bug before it can fire a second volley. Jumping over the volley works at mid-range as well, making punishes easier if you're a slower class. Unlike other flying enemies so far, the Death Beetle has a respectable amount of HP. It fires a single short-range projectile in a straight line that usually requires strafing to dodge. The projectile is slow enough to dodge up close in most cases, although slower weapons will have a harder time, especially against higher difficulties. Getting hit will apply a slowing debuff that can stack up to 3 times, so be especially careful not to get hit at all. Like the Death Beetle, the Giant Bat is a tankier flying enemy, but unlike the Death Beetle, it's not very threatening. It has a ranged screech that will inflict the drunk effect on your screen, which can be disorienting, but is ultimately just a visual filter. Their melee attack is almost impossible to get hit by, as long as you're moving around. Demon Bats are a rare enemy found in the Inferno, but they're not classified as a mini-boss, as they only have about as much health as a skeleton. Their only attack is a lunging kick in a straight line, which, you guessed it, is weak to circle strafing. If you're fighting the Skeleton Champion on even ground, the best way to deal with it is to bait out its first swing, stay relatively close so the champion is baited into continuing its combo, and punish once you see the shield bash. This attack has significantly more recovery than the others, giving time for even slow classes to safely get a punish. The champion has a quick, forward-stepping slash that makes shorter punish windows dangerous, so always remember to turn and move sideways or forwards instead of backpedaling. If you're a faster class, you can punish if the combo ends early, but this is riskier for slower classes. The Wraith is very scary if you don't know how to deal with it, but becomes one of the easiest enemies in the game with this strategy. No matter which attack it does, simply crouch, look straight down, and hold forward and left. Punish, duck, move forward left. Rinse and repeat until the Wraith is dead. The Giant Centipede has 2 attacks, a poison spit with a wide spread, and a forward lunge with a narrow hitbox. Both can be avoided by strafing forward and around the Centipede. This bug is very tanky, but not very threatening as long as you stay close and keep rotating forward. The Giant Worm is a rare mini-boss with a valuable drop, but it's not all that challenging. When it's burrowing underground, simply keep moving and it can't hit you when it emerges. From here, you can move close to attack it, and simply move away whenever it's about to retaliate. Eventually, it will spit poison around, forcing you to reposition, but otherwise this enemy is very non-threatening. The most notable feature of the Cockatrice is its petrification ability. Its first attempted attack will be a scream that petrifies you, but only if you're looking at the Cockatrice. Simply turn away to avoid getting frozen. When the scream misses, the Cockatrice is left wide open for several seconds. Other than this, they have a forward lunging kick and a walking peck with very good tracking. Because you can't circle strafe the peck, and the kick doesn't track, the best strategy is to walk diagonally away after each punish. The Cockatrice recovers very quickly from these attacks, so you need to time your punishes and movement well, but even a default barbarian can do this strategy consistently. The Demon Centaur has 2 primary attacks, an overhead swing and a sideways swing. The overhead swing can be dodged by ducking and moving left, and Sideways Swing can be dodged by just ducking. As long as you stay point blank, these are the only attacks this monster will use, and the fight will be very simple. But if you're farther away, they may attempt a charging stab that must be sidestepped. The Demon Berserker is one of the most dangerous enemies to deal with, truly deserving of the mini-boss title. It will alternate between diagonal swings, requiring you to crouch and move side to side to avoid them. The challenge is reacting to which attack is coming first, but once you've reacted to the first move, the follow-ups are consistent, at least until their combo ends. Nightmare Berserkers gain access to a sideways swing that they will throw out randomly to end their combo, and it must be ducked underneath by looking down and crouching. This move comes out extremely fast, so it's effectively a very deadly reaction check. This is definitely one of the roughest enemies on this list to deal with using purely evasive maneuvers, so more creative solutions may be preferred, especially at higher difficulties. And that's every enemy currently in the game. Bosses are not included here, as those are all much more complex and already have plenty of guides out there. While more enemies will undoubtedly be added in the future, this guide should give you the ideas you need to learn them for yourself. If any of the strategies listed here change drastically, there may be an updated video in the future, or there will be additional notes in the comments section.